Hello, today I'm going to do a sew along for one of my latest patterns, the Becky skirt. The Becky skirt is designed to be made in stable knit fabrics, so it's a really great entry-level pattern if you're starting to work with jersey for the first time. It's a child's skirt pattern with a size range from 12 months to 14 years, and it's a really versatile style as well. It's designed really to work with lots of my other patterns, so in the winter months it looks great with something like a George hoodie and Francis leggings, and then in spring and summer it could be worn with an Alice top or a Lee t-shirt. So it's really versatile style and it's super quick to make. So let's get started. I'm going to make my skirt in a French terry. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why it's important to have a stable knit towards the end of the video, but for now I'm just going to go through the setup. So I'm going to make this skirt using a regular sewing machine and an overlocker, but I will talk through the different options if you don't have an overlocker. But for now I've got the machine set up with a jersey needle in it, appropriate to the weight of the fabric, and also a shallow zigzag stitch. So the first thing we're going to do is join the centre back seam. You'll know the centre back because the side seam has a little notch on it which I've marked there with a nick. So the other edge is your centre back seam. So right sides together, and I'm going to stitch this seam. And this it's a 1.5 seam allowance on this pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll show you how that looks. I'm doing a little bit of reinforcing at the start and the finish just to stop the seam unravelling. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to overlock this edge, and like I said, because it's a stretch fabric, it's not important to even finish this edge. You could just either press that open or just press it to one side and it would be fine. It's not going to fray and become messy because it's a knit fabric. The other option you could do is you could zigzag it again and just push it to one side, or again zigzag them separately and press it open. So it's entirely up to you on that really. I tend to go by the weight of the fabric. If it's a heavier weight fabric, it's probably best to press the seam open because it becomes thick and bulky. And if it's a light to medium weight, I tend to go with just pushing it, overlocking them together, pushing it to one side. It's quicker and easier. So that's where we are at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and overlock that, and then we'll move on to the next step. So I've gone ahead and overlocked that just for neatness really, like I said, rather than functionality, and I've pressed it to one side, so that's how the skirt looks at this stage. So the next thing to do is the side seams in exactly the same manner, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'll also overlock them and press the seam to the back. I just want to say the reason why I'm doing this in a shallow zigzag stitch is so that the seam has a little bit of stretch, a bit of give in it, because obviously the fabric has give in it. So if, even though this isn't a tight fitting garment, if the skirt does pull on something, you've got less chance of having a hole. If this was a straight stitch and you pulled it, the stitching would just snap. So that's the reason for having the zigzag stitch. There are other alternatives on sewing machines. You can have a stretch stitch, but I tend to find the zigzag stitch works really well, and I'm happy to use that really. So I'm going to go ahead and put these two together and sew the side seams now, and I shall come back when I've done that. So I'll just put a few pins in to hold the seams together, and also I'm matching up those notches. So I've stitched those seams and pressed them towards the back. So the next thing to do is to make the waistband. So the waistband just needs joining at the short ends. So put right sides together and literally just stitch across that in the same way you've done the other seams. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press this seam open so it's not too bulky, because this is a waistband, and I'm going to bring the two raw edges together and press the waistband in half so the raw edges are matched and you've got a crease down this centre line. So I'm going to do that and then I'll show you how that looks. So there we have the waistband folded in half and ready to apply to the top of the skirt. So what we want to do is apply the whole waistband, both raw edges matched to the raw edge of the top of the skirt. But what I would do is mark the centre front of the skirt. So if you haven't done that when it was when the pattern was on it, all you need to do is bring the two side seams together and just put a little nick in the centre front so that you've got a centre front mark. And you can do the same on the waistband. Just bring your waistband in half starting at the seam line and just do a little nick in the centre front. So then if you put your centre back seam to the centre back seam of the skirt, like I said, all raw edges together, so we're like this. So both raw edges of the waistband and the top of the skirt, and then bring your centre front seams together and then carry on and pin round. But you may find because it's slightly stretchy that it doesn't fit, so just ease it as you go. I mean it does fit, but it's just you can end up pushing too much fabric and ending up with a bubble of excess fabric at the end of the waistband. So just pin carefully as you go all the way around the top of the waistband, just easing it in, and it will fit. So let me do that and I'll show you how that looks. So there we go, that's all pinned in place. It can be a little bit tricky. The best thing to do with this is to just let the fabric relax, because you can find, because it's stretch and because it's a curve going onto a straight band, you can find that you have a little bit of excess skirt fabric. But the key thing is keep your points, your centre points marked, and just let the fabric relax as you pin it. You'll probably find it fits in quite nicely, but if it doesn't, just go back and just readjust the pins until you get a good fit there. So what we're going to do now is just stitch that seam around. It is a 1.5 seam allowance, and what's left is the right size for the elastic channel, so it's key to try and keep those quite accurate and also to have the right size elastic for your size you're making. So I like to start this seam just away from the centre back, because we don't want too much going on at that centre back seam. So I'm going to start just away from it, and we need to leave a gap of 4 or 5 centimetres to allow the elastic to be pushed into the channel. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I shall show you that in a minute. There we go, I stitched that. Had a couple of problems with the thread, snapped, but basically I've stitched all the way around there, so your waistband is in place. What I would do at this stage before you do anything else is just check that your elastic is going to fit inside the channel. You want to have enough room for it should have around about half a centimetre room for movement. If it's a lot wider than that, you'll probably find the elastic looks a bit lost in it, and if the elastic's wider than the band, it's going to fold over and be a little bit messy. So just check that, because at this stage you could take the waistband off, and readjust it if you needed to. But that fits. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to overlock this edge around, just leaving that gap where I've allowed for the elastic to go in. So I'm going to come off there and come on to, off here. But if you haven't got an overlocker and you want to, it is quite nice to finish this seam, because it's 3 raw edges otherwise. So I would just zigzag stitch that around, again still leaving the opening. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you how that looks. So there we go, I've overlocked that round and left the gap. So all we need to do now is thread the elastic in the channel. So I've got a piece of elastic cut to my daughter's waist measurement with the 3 centimetres overlap for joining, and I've threaded a safety pin into the end, and all I'm going to do now is feed this into the channel. So just thread the elastic, the safety pin rather, into the waistband. And just start to push the fabric over the head of the pin until it starts to feed inside the band. And what you can do if you're worried about this end is you can just put a safety pin and attach that to the skirt to stop it going inside, because it's really frustrating if you lose the end. You've got to go all the way through the whole channel again. So I'm going to carry on, just thread the elastic through, and then I'll show you what we do next. There we go, I've got both ends out now. So what I'm going to do now is just check, just let that feed in a little bit further, and just check that the elastic is not twisted. And once you're happy that the elastic's not twisted, lay one end over the other like that. So just lay it on top of the other one by the 3 centimetres that you allowed, and then I'm just going to sew these 2 flat edges together. So I'll take the safety pin out, I'm pretty happy that's not twisted, so I'm just going to go ahead and stitch that. It doesn't really matter what it looks like, it's all going to go inside the channel anyway, but just make sure it's nice and secure. Just did a little box type thing there. Now you can just let the elastic go inside the skirt and just give it a good pull to feed it into the right place and get the gathers evenly distributed. Then what we need to do is just close that gap, so where your seam line's finished but at each end, just stitch across that so it joins up, and then likewise overlock across. So I'll do that now. Make sure you're not catching the elastic when you are stitching at this point though. So I'm going to overlock that little piece shut, and then I'll show you the final thing on the waistband, and then we'll do the hem and you'll have a finished skirt. So I've just overlocked across there, just tapering the overlocking off, but like I said, you could also just zigzag that. I'm not too fussed about these pieces, I'm just going to snip them off, but if you want to, you can thread that into the eye of a wide-eyed needle and just run the overlocking back through the stitching. But basically that's your waistband on. So what we need to do now is just to give that a good stretch so that everything is evenly distributed, and I like to just stitch through the waistband at the side seams. So let's find the side seams. Once you're happy that that's looking nice and even, and I just do this with a straight stitch actually, because you're just securing the elastic. So we're just going to literally stitch through the elastic and the waistband in line with the side seam at both sides, but make sure, like I said, make sure it's nice and even before you start stitching. So I'm going back onto a straight stitch. I'm going to make sure the seam is pushed downways when I stitch. I'm starting from the top and I'm going to reverse back up to the top once I've got to the bottom, so it's like a double set of stitching. There we go. I'm going to do that same thing on the other side, and then we'll do the hem just to finish the skirt. Just neaten that up in a minute. So while I was on the overlocker, I overlocked the entire hem edge, but this again, it's not important, and actually sometimes I do opt to just leave this raw, especially if it's a slightly bulkier fabric, and just turn it once and then zigzag stitch the hem. But what I just want to say at this point, this is the thing where I just wanted to mention about the stable knits. Because if your fabric is, say, it's got some linen in it or viscose and it's more of a stretchy, bouncy kind of knit, you may well find that your skirt hemline will drop and it will become uneven. So it's not to say that you couldn't make this skirt using that fabric, but if you do that, I would recommend that you hang the skirt up on a coat hanger, ideally with pegs like this, and just let the skirt hang overnight for 24 hours and just see if it's still okay, because sometimes you can have that problem with some jersey fabrics and flared styles. But I've made this in French terry for the original prototypes of the garment, and I know that the hem doesn't drop. So I've gone ahead and overlocked this, and now literally all we need to do is just turn that up and stitch it. So I pressed it after I overlocked it, so I'm just going to pin round and then use a zigzag stitch to stitch basically over the overlocking, so that I've got a 1.5 centimetre single turned hem just to complete the skirt. So I'll go ahead and pin that and show you how that looks. So there we are, I've pinned that round. I'm going to go ahead and sew that and show you how that looks in a minute. There we go. So I've just stitched a zigzag stitch all the way around the hem. It's basically over the overlocking edge, but like I said, if you were using a raw edge on this, I certainly wouldn't zigzag it first. I'd just zigzag it once and just covering the raw edge. But there we go, completely finished skirt. Very, very fast, very, very simple, and very, very versatile. So I hope you enjoyed that little sew along, and if you'd like to see more videos, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.